Thank you, Grace. Thank you very much. And welcome, everybody. Great to have you here late, Eastern time at least, for us. Welcome from sunny Puerto Rico. That's what it looks like outside. Not quite today. Today it's actually raining, but that's what it can look like outside here. I really want to welcome Mark Penicook to this presentation. Mark is the Director of Digital Accessibility at Capital One, and he leads the enterprise program and team at Capital One. And I'd like to give Mark a little bit of time to talk about what he's done at Capital One since he joined and how the team has got to where it is today.
Dylan, thank you so much. And first off, thank you for yourself and DQ to host the session virtually and invite me along. I'm super happy to be here and be a part of the session today. Just a little bit about myself. So I've been at Capital One now for 7.5 years with the digital accessibility team that entire time. And as we'll probably talk about in the session today, we've had a journey over the years of managing conformance and managing digital accessibility at a large organization, a large enterprise. And the digital accessibility team, actually, Capital One predates me. We've had a team for, maybe close to a decade or so now, that started off as one person within our SEO team, and then has expanded to the team that we have today. And there's been a lot of progress and learning and things along the way that I'm going to be happy to talk a little bit about as we go through the session. But a lot of that is due to amazing people that I work with that are a part of my team and are part of our organization at Capital One. So we're super excited to just kind of share our story and also some of the best practices that we hope might help others.
Excellent. And the reason, when I was thinking about creating this session, the reason I thought of Capital One and Mark is because of a story that I became aware of a little bit over a year ago about a good friend and ex-DQer and his experience as a completely blind person when he tried to open a bank account. Well, I think it was trying to get a credit card, if I remember it correctly. And he went to a bank, that shall remain nameless, and started trying to fill the information out, and got to a point where he'd submitted something to the website and was waiting for feedback, and there was very specific information there that he could detect with the screen reader, which said, "Please don't refresh your screen. Wait until this completes." And he sat there and he sat there and he sat there, and unbeknownst to him, that had completed and was now waiting on a response from him. And because he couldn't respond within time, it timed out, and then he'd used up that one ability for him to get a credit check, and it had impacted his credit score. And actually going back and resubmitting that form would have been a big problem for him. And so he was really frustrated by that experience. And he went off to another bank and tried the same thing on that bank. And he found this amazing experience. And he described to us how well this website worked. And at the end of it, actually it was Travis Marasco who was talking to him about this, said, like, which bank was that? And then he said it was Capital One. And really, for me, Mark, that's kind of the end result of what has been 10 years at Capital One and 7.5 years for you. Is the proof of the pudding is that experience that you've been able to create. How did hearing that story, when you heard it, how did that make you feel?
Yeah, amazing. I think there's lots of emotions and thoughts about that are all extremely rewarding and positive and proud of. And I'm the lucky person to talk about that or to say that today, but there's been a lot of folks at Capital One that helped achieve that or make that a possibility and come true. But at the end of the day, what resonates with us and with me is that we're trying to have a supreme focus on our customers and on our users. And we want digital accessibility to be something that is a given, that is an expectation that allows users, regardless of ability or assistive technology that they may be using, to have those experiences everywhere across the web, whether it's financial services or other experiences or things like that. So there's no better feedback than to hear from an actual user, an actual customer, and to hear that you're doing well. So we hope to continue that.
Excellent. So let's talk about it, because what a lot of central accessibility teams struggle with is this sort of contentious relationship between the central team who's trying to get the organization to change. And often the organization isn't changing. And it's the central accessibility team members who are often very passionate about accessibility. Maybe they've got disabilities of their own. Maybe they've got close family members who have. That's one of the reasons maybe they got into this. They get very frustrated with this, this sort of environment. And if they're not careful, that can lead to a contentious relationship with the development teams and the design teams and the testing teams that can actually make it more difficult to get the accessibility program off the ground. So I know that you and some of the people that came before you, but you've done a really good job of getting your team to be seen as the helpful hand. Can you talk about some of the things you did to gain trust from the development team, gain trust in the design teams, and get yourself included early in the process?
Yeah, and thank you for the lead in and the prompt there. I'll maybe start with the mission statement of our team. We are a central accessibility team. We're responsible for the entire enterprise, so all of our operations in the United States, in Canada, and in the UK. And when we thought about our role, and to your point, Dylan, of wanting to be a trusted advisor, a good partner, and working closely hand in hand with our development teams, our design teams, really from the beginning to the end, we crafted a mission statement that essentially says our mission is to enable others to deliver inclusive experiences as just a fundamental part of the way that we do business. So this is going to be a theme that probably comes up a few times during our discussion today. Is the first step along that path or that journey, I think, is gaining buy-in from others that accessibility and the efforts that you make towards it are no different than many other efforts that are made across an organization. And as a development team, or as a designer, or as another stakeholder in the process, there's an underlying desire to be the best at your craft. We used to use the term and talk about helping folks be masters of their craft. And I would argue that you're not the best developer you could be if you're not aware of accessibility, if you're not addressing accessibility. You're not the best designer that you could be if you haven't learned, invested in, and are contributing to accessibility. And so where we start sort of, from that dynamic and move from is, my team is here to assist us accomplish a common goal. So at Capital One, we have, like most organizations, core values, and a couple of ours are to do the right thing and to promote excellence and things like that. So we want to align around the common desire and goal to deliver the best experiences, the best products that we can, and that must include accessibility. And so as we talk about that, and as we kind of continue through our journey and talking to all of our partners and our stakeholders, it becomes a much easier conversation. It becomes one that we all can unite around and can accomplish together based on that. And so the difference there too is we look to provide a subject matter expertise and guidance along the way in order to help fulfill upon those kinds of things.
Excellent. So you talked about tying into the organization's values. Yeah, that's a great way to get to raise the level of the conversation away from the things that people aren't doing right and talk about how good they could be. Are there things that you did specifically that were different with the design team, say, versus what you did with the development teams to have those conversations and to getting included in the conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, sometimes I forget about a lot of the things that we've done over time, but we from the very beginning we sought out to demystify the user experience. So in our view, that was really an awareness campaign where we wanted to ensure that our developers, our designers, our partners understood the impacts, the needs, and the realities of our users and of our customers broadly in all types of circumstances or situations, and pointing out how the things that you work on, the things that we develop, the things that we build are used by various all types and sorts of different folks and in different ways and in ways that you may not have considered or thought about, and then illustrating the impacts of those things not being accessible or as accessible as we want, or not having the usability that we're looking for, that we expect, or that we want. And we did that through a variety of ways. We have a video internally that we developed and show that talks about different use cases and users and what accessibility means to them. We've do a lot of demonstrations, both of different assistive technologies and of other things like that. And we try to, at every chance we get, drive more awareness through things like Global Accessibility Awareness Day, CSUN, all of those kinds of things that help promote awareness and also brings the true customer experience to light for folks that may have not seen it before. And lots of times in our experience has been, when you're able to do that, light bulbs start going off and realizations start to happen. And then you have local champions and other folks who are adding momentum to the mission and to making things more and more accessible. And it kind of has a grassroots momentum build to it that's also pretty special and can be really valuable.
Yeah, that's amazing. Actually, I know that you get involved in recruiting at universities and stuff like that as well. Do you think that has an impact on just people that you're interviewing who are coming into the organization, seeing that people involved in accessibility are front and center in recruiting efforts?
Yeah, that's a great question. In my experience, in the students that I've had opportunities to meet, it's definitely been a positive reaction to learning about my team and the role that my team plays at Capital One and the types of things that we work on and that we do. I think that there's so many reasons that accessibility is important, and the continued evolution of digital interactions is a huge part of that. And I think that more and more folks, and particularly even the younger generation, are so accustomed to interacting with the companies that they bank with, the companies that they use other products and services with on their phones or on tablets or via the web and things like that. It's a keen area of interest and of growth, and I think it's been my pleasure, at least, to, when interviewing or meeting young folks, to kind of share our story a little bit, and we've had really positive responses to that.
That's great. Yeah, and I remember just talking about the events that you hold yourself. I remember back way in the day when myself and Salesh were there, and we had this event where we had 4 different stations set up, and Salesh is blind, and he had his Braille keyboard there and was actually demonstrating use of your website to your executives, and just the way that opened up the eyes of the executives to see, and just be able to see that Salesh, he's an impressive guy on his own because he used to be a CFO. He's very well educated, and for them to see that there's this well-educated person who went blind late in life, but despite that, what they've learned to be able to do with Braille and screen readers, and then to see that person struggling with your website. Do you still do those sorts of events, and do you think they're important in getting the inspiration of the executives and the buy-in at the executive level?
We do. Now, you've got a great memory of a lot of the events and things that we've done over the years and that you've been a part of as well. We do, and have to give credit where credit is due. We followed some other organizations that we became aware of that did an amazing job with empathy labs and other things like that. And we've taken those examples and internalized them for Capital One and what that means for us, and take every opportunity that we can to drive awareness. And we have a whole, I think you may remember that there was a lot of different assistive technology displays and other things that we do. And we try to, going back to kind of my earlier point as well, with driving awareness around customer experiences and things like that, we try to get our folks around Capital One to do some of these things. Global Accessibility Awareness Day, I mentioned earlier, that's a big one, and we do a lot around that every year. And there's lots of other similar examples and things that we do from a training perspective, from what we call road shows and other awareness types of meetings and meetups, and we get people to either view assistive technologies or to try them themselves or different things like that, and everything from vision impairments of different types to other assistive technologies to Braille, refreshable Braille displays and other things, and again, that goes a long way. It goes a long way to helping bring it right to the customer level, and that's the kind of awareness that we really want.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that, just talking about getting yourself included early in the process, I know that you are what I would consider one of the kind of leading organizations in terms of what you do with your design review process. Could you describe a little bit how you do the design review, and maybe how you were able to get that to the point where the designers come to you that early in the process?
Yeah, so I think it's no secret that the earlier you can get involved in a delivery process, the more accessible you can make it, and also the more you can prevent rework or things progressing through the delivery life cycle towards release to production. that still have, things that you want to fix and less time to do it and all of that. So we spent a lot of time investing heavily in partnering with our design organization. We had the head of our design organization was a huge proponent of ours and really helped us drive that engagement and drive awareness throughout design, so that we were able to build some really wonderful relationships into their processes and into the way that that they would deliver and partner before even a handoff to engineering. And we've continued to expand and grow that relationship as best we can. And the ask, or ideally, is that we wanted to meet our designers where they were and give them an opportunity to get our guidance on design artifacts really at any stage or as early stages as possible. So we're willing to partner on anything from basic wireframes up to fully functional clickable prototypes and things like that, and provide our guidance and also some awareness to say, this is based on what we see. You should also be mindful of this as we continue to progress into development and things like that, which has been great. It's been a wonderful partnership, and our designers have embraced that and not only been receptive to that, but have had also a desire to learn and to get more and kind of more to make sure that the things that they're producing are accessible and that they're thinking about things the right way and all those kind of things.
Excellent. So moving on, I mean, we've talked a little bit about design teams. So you've talked about the fact that you do reviewing of wireframes and all the way up to clickable prototypes. What challenges do you still have as it relates to design?
Yeah, I would say there's with most things in related to accessibility, there's a lot of things that we could talk about here. There's there's lots and lots, but I think fundamentally, I think there's a few things, and one is we're an agile environment, and the pace at which we work and deliver is fast. So there's always a desire to be able to enable work quickly and easily, and to not kind of
slow things down. Yeah.
Slow things down in terms of the roadmap and delivery maps and things like that and what have you. But I think we've done well with that, because I think the answer there is largely, like we talked about, the earlier you can engage, the more you can really expedite, empower, and enable delivery and speed of delivery. And also the nice thing there is that over time, you develop awareness and knowledge and expertise among your partners. So as you kind of continue through the journey, you see more and more teams and designers who have that knowledge base that they already know some of the answers or know some of the things, and you become better and better, right? So that's one. But I think the other thing that's really interesting here is the proliferation of UI and all of the different ways that you can present UI to customers, and how do we align around making sure that, yes, it's accessible and it's also extremely usable. You want simple, you want intuitive, you want to do those things. And there's a lot of questions and possibilities that haven't necessarily been answered yet, or where you're kind of blazing new territory or trying new things. And that's really exciting. And, we relish that opportunity. But you have to want to keep close eye on that and approach, those challenges and make sure that you have engagement and involvement and you're asking the right questions and kind of doing the right things, so that you can look at something that maybe has never been done before, doing something in a different way, but that it's still good, it's still better.
Yeah. So one of the problem areas often in organizations is kind of that gap between when something comes out of design and then goes to development. There's a lot of information that gets lost at that point. I'm sure you still probably have problems in that area, but is that something that you consider still a problem area, or is that something that you think you've mostly solved? How do you consider that handoff from developers to design, from designers to developers?
Yeah, that's one of those circumstances, Dylan. That's always can be better. Like even if feel like you're doing really good, there's always room to get better on that. And this has been our approach, and it's maybe sort of novel or interesting to the folks in the session today, but we truly view accessibility as a connection point or as a interconnective method to improve those handoffs. So if we have designers thinking and talking about accessibility and we're giving guidance that will also ultimately funnel to development, then we're helping to improve those handoffs. We're helping to create that interconnectivity between those handoffs, and we're using accessibility as a method to do that. And then once you're in development, and it kind of goes both ways too. So the handoffs go to development, and as we're talking with them, there may be something that is design related or that needs to go back to design to have a question answered or something like that. But again, we're fostering conversations using accessibility as an impetus to do so. And then likewise, kind of continue on. And we actually sort of view that from product to design to development and then all the way ultimately to production. So that's kind of been our approach and our thought process is that accessibility can really provide a means, a method, and an interconnectivity to make those conversations even better than they are.
Right. Yeah. So, you often talk about the way that accessibility becomes this usability lens, but what you're saying is it actually can help to improve the process of the development process as well. Right. That's great. So it's a good segue to developers. What are the sorts of things that you expect your developers to learn, and what support do you give them in terms of resources to help them both learn and do better at producing accessible applications?
Yeah, ultimately, I'll kind of go back to starting with our mission statement of enabling others to deliver inclusive experiences as a fundamental part of the way that we do business. And for developers, we do a few things. So my team centrally provides tools, training, and also subject matter expertise testing and consulting at multiple sort of integration points along the way. But we do expect developers to be aware of accessibility and our requirements for that, and what that means to them and what their role is in terms of delivering that along the way. Our view, again, is that we're here to enable that and to help them achieve that. Sorry, I've got a dog barking in the background. And we provide the resources to help them do so. So a lot of that comes to our training program. And we look at that in multiple ways. So we want to offer sort of a complete suite of training opportunities because we know that time is of the essence, and bandwidth and allocation and being able to consume the training that you need, with a full schedule or time constraints can be difficult. So we try to offer multiple services there, everything from very quick lunch and learns or brown bags and things like that, up to immersion workshops and things like that. And then tools. So we want to make sure that developers locally have tools. So they have Axe and test browser extensions and are testing there and are using automation. I mean, obviously the goal is to leverage automation at every chance that we can get. So we're doing those things. And then it's kind of on the, throughout the process or kind of towards delivery and ultimately what's released to production. My team will also do testing and support and help with remediation and code fixes and advising on how to go about doing those things.
So yeah, one of the things I find really great about your program is, when you were describing it to me, is how you get involved in pre-release testing and how involved your team is in pre-release testing. Can you just talk a little bit about that pre-release testing process and what happens with the defects? And also, yeah, let's just talk about that first.
Yeah, absolutely. So we take a two-dimensional sort of view of the world, which is the pre-release cycle, which is all of the things that a company or organization is working on delivering. It's being built, and then it ultimately will go to production. And then we also do a lot of work to look at what's in production and what's out there and what testing and so forth.
Monitoring.
So and monitoring and remediating, etc. So pre-release, our process on that is, as we kind of talked about, engaging very early as we can through design into development, and then as we approach production or as we approach a release, we have tracked throughout that period of time the opportunities, the instances of non-conformance, the things from an accessibility perspective that are meeting our standard, and our standard at Capital One is like probably most organizations aligned to WCAG 2.0 or 2.1, excuse me, AA. And at that point, we do a few things, but the first, I think, is we indicate and start to report to teams as they approach production status, so that we can work towards completing all of that work prior to release, and that also is reported both to our developers and then also to our business owners, so that they're aware of status and so forth. And that way, it allows us to dashboard and to drive visibility and to drive awareness, and we can then kind of do the work that we set out to do, or kind of ensure that we're doing the work that we set out to do prior to a release.
Yeah, so I mean, what I hear you saying is that actually, because you're involved early on with this design review, ahead of time when there's stuff coming down the pike, and you can track that, and then you're actually doing full assessments of that content as it's going into the testing environments and tracking those defects and reporting those defects. I assume that not all of those defects get fixed before stuff goes to production, right? Sometimes some of those defects go into production. What do you do? Can you talk a little bit about what happens to those defects if they do make it into production?
Yeah, so I think the kind of organizationally and all organizations, and our goal, as I said, was to embed accessibility into all of our processes the same way that we do other things, instead of, or in some cases, being after the fact or kind of an afterthought or things like that. So we worked very hard over the years to do that. And that still, from time to time can come to decisions around maybe there's a release that's happening today that's very important to resolve another issue that's very important, and we still have an instance that we want to fix from an accessibility standpoint. So we have set parameters around remediating those and the follow-up in order to close those out in those cases. And we continue to track and escalate those and work towards closing them out, really in a fast follower, like subsequent release. Like so.
So do they go into part of your risk reporting then at that point when they go into production?
Yeah, absolutely. So we report and track those through our organizational reporting structures that manage risk and other things, so that we have visibility to those organizationally across the company and can address them. And we've also put some requirements before that too, as to what is or is not acceptable or allowed in those cases. So if we have something that's high severity, or if we have something that's a critical blocker, that's not allowed to go. Like those must be fixed. So you're not allowed to release those, but otherwise we continue to track things and to report out on them, and then make sure that we drive those to remediation.
Grace, can you hear me? I've lost Mark's video and sound.
Oh no, looks like we're having some technical difficulties. Please hang tight. Hey Mark, if you're still there, can you give us a hey?
Yeah, still here. Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you. How about you, Dylan? All right, looks like we might have lost Dylan here. So I think now might be a good time to go into questions. Is that good with you, Mark?
Oh,
well,
here we go.
he's back.
Sorry about that. Seems like my connection dropped and is now back again. Sorry about that. Do you have me? Let me see if I can reinstantiate my sharing here. And oops. Whoa. No. All right. Hopefully we're back now.
Good.
Yeah, so we are getting a little short on time right now. Let me just talk a little bit. So you talked about your risk management system. What changes when you look at it from managing change as an overall thing? What are the changes that have been hard to get to stick at Capital One in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I think that accessibility and an accessibility journey at an organization is absolutely classic change management in many ways. And so all of the challenges that one might think of come into play with everything from sustaining training with turnover and just evolving organizations with changes in how organizations are structured, organized, and the methods and things they use, and needing to be agile in those responses to drive them home. And I think challenges are all of those, and I think probably most organizations have felt the same or have done those. I think Capital One is no different. That like anything, it takes time. So I think maybe the first realization is that change doesn't happen overnight. There's a process to it, and There's steps, pragmatic steps to take along the way. And then there's the typical change management challenges that you want to address, just like you would with anything else.
Yeah. That's a great segue to what I was going to talk about at the end here before we go to questions from the audience. But accessibility is ultimately change. It's about acquiring new behaviors, it's about suppressing old bad behaviors, and it's about learning new skills. And in order to do that, you really, as you pointed out, you need to manage that process. So, we talk about the 7 transformational practices, creating a central team. I think that's something you did really, really well. You were able to obtain executive buy-in. You did empathy events and things like that to get that buy-in. You were persistent, took your time, but you got there. You created a policy. You're reporting on your accessibility transformation and on your outcomes. You've given the teams different resources, including coaching, and you've got a lot of supportive learning resources there as well. And then from the teams themselves perspective, there are 9 team practices that we often talk about, including users with disabilities in the UI design, communicating design intent correctly, which you're doing with your designers, leveraging automated testing, managing your defects systematically, and including accessibility in retrospectives are some of the things that I heard you talking about today. I've written a book on this. There's a new version of this book that'll be coming out in May. So if people are interested, go and search for Agile Accessibility Explained, or I think we're going to send a link to you where you can submit a request for a free book to be sent out. We have some of those that we're going to be sending out. And let's, Grace, if we could open it up to questions from the audience, please.
Absolutely. We have some great questions here. First off, why don't we start with where accessibility sits within CAP 1? This person asks, is it in IT? Is it in marketing?
Yeah, great question. Happy to answer that one. And so the team organizationally is a part of our enterprise services line of business, which is a horizontal. We initially were part of a group that was known as digital operations, but we've evolved and over time currently sit within our enterprise services risk office. This is a good question. When I've talked to lots of folks at CSUN about over the years in the past and things like that, we feel that it's particularly advantageous or good for us because we have partnership and I guess the ability to work closely with our engineering and our tech group. Same thing with our design group, but without being organizationally in the same group, it allows us a bit of flexibility in terms of working with both equally well and not sort of necessarily being part of tech advising design or being in design advising tech or those kinds of things. So for us, it's been a ideal organizational structure to be able to partner across all of the organizations that we ultimately work with, because we have a huge engagement with risk, compliance, legal, tech, product in the business, and then also design.
Right. Actually, you said something very interesting, and it prompted a related question. Initially, you were much closer to tech, right? You were in, I think, one of the divisions that was responsible for some part of the applications. Do you think the fact that you were that close to tech gave you some sort of ability, access early on that made the program, helped the program be as successful as it is? If you had to start over again, would you start where you are today, or would you start where you originally started back then? What do you think the right approach is if you were advising somebody what to do?
Yeah, great points, Dylan. So us historically, and kind of where we began and were born out of were we were centrally located in our enterprise platform group. So the folks, both tech, design, et cetera, that were largely responsible for or entirely responsible for our enterprise platforms. So the large frameworks that our servicing and marketing, web presence, and mobile applications, and all those things were built and delivered out of. And that was extremely fortunate and advantageous for us. So I think that if I had to answer your question, I think, and if I was advising someone else, I would probably ask a question to them of where they are in their journey in order to give the best or better answer, because it may be that depending on where you are in the maturation of your program, that one answer is better than another. For us, I wouldn't trade kind of how it evolved for us. I think it ended up being ideal, and we're ultimately now, I think, in the right place, and I think we were in the right place at that time, but we were in different points of our journey.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's probably no one right answer. It really depends to a large degree on how things work within your organization. But I definitely, from the outside looking in, I felt it was an advantage early on that you were close to tech, because ultimately the same VP could make decisions, affecting sometimes some of those trade-offs, which are a little easier when you're trying to build a program up. Do we have time for more questions, Grace?
We do, yes. We're running until 3:20 Pacific, if I did the time right there.
So we have 10 more minutes. Okay, excellent.
Great. And I think this question also speaks to how your accessibility team is organized. This person asked, how many designers and other roles does your accessibility team have? And are they placed in different locations from your own? And if so, how do you handle that?
Yep, that's a great question. So my team is comprised of a mix of backgrounds and role types. We have folks who have a very strong design background or who are designers. We have folks who are front-end UI and front-end developer backgrounds. We have some process managers and risk managers, and several folks have cross-functional skills, training, and their backgrounds across multiple dimensions of that. We have currently, my team is all co-located, but we have not always been co-located. We have had times where we've had different members of the team in different geographical areas and in different sort of hubs of our offices and things around the country. I'd say one thing about that I should maybe highlight too is that one of the things that we've done for many years, kind of going back to some of the things we were talking about earlier from a training perspective and an awareness perspective, is that we've built a local champion network over time, so that we have, if you're not directly on the accessibility team, you may still be a local champion and or a leader for accessibility in your area. And so we have folks all across the country in all of our offices who have been amazing partners and have become champions of their own, and that are extensions of our team, even if they're not directly organizationally reporting to us.
Excellent. We have two questions on integrating user testing and user research. So these questions are asking, how do you identify the touch points for testing with people with disabilities, and how do you integrate that into your process overall?
Yeah, that's another great question. So within our design organization, not obviously directly a result of my work or my team's work. They have built out some user labs in various locations throughout the country, where we have large office or operations and things like that. And what we've done, or done our best to do, is to partner with them to ensure that, as part of user research and user testing that's taking place, that they're also considering, and at every opportunity including folks with disabilities in that process. So in that regard, I would say we've been more of an advocate and a consultant or a guide for that group to help enable them. And we certainly try to do as much on our own or locally as possible, either with associates or people that have offered to do that for us, and things like that. I've done some user studies myself here in Richmond, and met with several customers, and kind of spent a few hours with them and conducting some research and things like that. But definitely, I think it's very important, and an area where we're looking to do more.
Great.
There are organizations out there that specialize in recruiting users with disabilities and helping to do studies like that. So if you don't have that sort of capability within your organization, or you're smaller than Capital One, then there are organizations that can help you with that for all purposes, whether it's upfront or... Go ahead.
And I would just kind of piggyback on that too. Like, so yeah, like Nobility, if you're not familiar with them, is who's who we have asked help for, and other things in that regard too, and they've been great. So
absolutely,
piggybacking onto what Dylan said.
Fantastic. I think we have time for a couple more questions here. When something is wrong in the process, either faulty design or faulty implementation, how do you address that to the designer or the developer?
That's a fantastic question. So let me start by saying that one of the first declarations that we made was that we were not here to, and this goes back to maybe Dylan's first point too, about how do you build trust and good partnership. We've always said that we're, as a team, the digital accessibility team at Capital One, is not here to stifle creativity or to tell designers that they can't do something or things like that. We're here to ensure that what you do and the creativity that you show is accessible. So we're going to help you in that regard, and not sort of override or stifle or even sort of dictate implementations or other questions around that. But we will certainly make sure that that's accessible, whichever you decide to do. And I think that that's a key sort of nuance, because if you are limiting in the creativity of implementations or designs or things of that nature, you're not sure what solutions might be better that you hadn't thought of. So we sort of want to leverage the amazing people that work with us and work for us, and the brilliance of those folks, and then give them the latitude to be creative and find creative solutions. And then we're here to make sure that that's being done in an accessible way, and maybe to help a new solution that hadn't otherwise been either thought of or developed yet. So that's key. I think the first thing in terms of how you go about handling that. I think the second part of that is we take a guide approach. So my team and the organization that I'm a part of hasn't, I think Dylan had it as one of his steps along the way, is that you want to give teams coaches. We call those guides. So we have guides that are allocated to all the various parts of the business in different areas, whether it's engineering or design or others who are there as subject matter experts to help advise and consult along the way. And so we want to take a consultative approach to that and say, okay, whatever the breakdown or the fault that was found is, here's our destination or our goal. How we go about that. We're here to help determine that with you, and not prescribe it to you specifically.
I think that's a key reason that your program is as successful as it is, because you don't take that kind of hammer approach to a lot of things that you do. You take that consultative approach, that guide approach, and you've done that from the beginning. And I can remember, early on you had these wireframe design review sessions, where people could just, it was like office hours and people could just come and then you would give them feedback on their designs. And often they were oversubscribed because people really wanted that feedback. They wanted that input. And you didn't say, do it this way. You said, here's the problems with the way you've done it. Maybe you could think about this. And that really changes the tone of the interactions, and makes, I think, fed into the success of this program from my point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to kind of this idea of a journey, and I think that's really important too, is that accessibility is not a finish line that you cross. This is a journey that we're going to be on forever, in just in different ways and as we go. And our thought is we want to all go on that journey together. So,
Yeah. Awesome.
Awesome. Well, we are right at 3:20 Pacific time. Thank you so much for our attendees for joining us. Big thank you to Mark for sharing so much of his insight into Cap One's accessibility program. Thank you, Dylan, for the presentation. And we hope everybody has a great rest of their Thursday.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Yes, thanks everyone.
Thank you.